On Possessed, we critically investigate the histories that possess us and their afterlives. Your hosts and occasional exorcists are me, Andrew Burns.
And I'm Matt Kistner.
We are possessed by our pasts. Yesterday's ideas haunt us today, exerting a powerful influence on us, shaping how we think about and engage with the world. Today, we're fortunate to have Jennifer Deckert and André Megerdichian as our guests. And our theme for today is Idealized Bodies. What makes a body ideal? Is it how it looks, what it does, or what it signifies? In this episode, we explore the ever-shifting idea of the ideal or idealized body with two professional dancers and professors of dance whose work grapples daily with bodies in motion, under scrutiny, and in transformation. Co-hosted by a philosopher and a Renaissance historian, we bring together embodied practice and historical reflection. Our study of the past teaches us that ideas about the body are historically contingent and deeply contextual. How have such frameworks changed or endured in modern media, in dance, and in everyday life? And what kinds of ideals continue to regulate, elevate, or distort our sense of what a body should be? How are we today still possessed by these ideas? Jennifer Deckert, André Megerdichian, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Can we start with each of you giving a brief autobiographical summary? André, take it away.
Okay. Well, I came to dance late. I started when I was 18, then danced professionally through my 20s and 30s. And then in my late 30s, when I saw the end of my, you might say the reliability of the body diminished. I started transitioning into teaching and then went and received my MFA later. So I was 40 when I was finished with that degree process and then jumped into academia after that. So that's the real basic version.
Perfect. And how about you, Jen? How did you come to dance?
Oh, I started dancing when I was 4. My mom enrolled me in the ballet studio around the corner that just happened to be the best one in the whole region. And I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with the detail of it, the precision of it. I fell in love with that there was a right way and a wrong way, which I think there are some kids that really hold on to that idea of right and wrong. And I think that I was one of those kids that really found that to be really helpful. And so I kept dancing all the way through my youth and teenage years. I prioritized it above all other things. And then I went to school later at University of Utah to pursue a degree in dance. And I meant to graduate and go perform, but I sprained my ankle really severely. And so I stayed on for another 2 years and finished my MFA. I then danced professionally in New York and New Jersey and Philadelphia. And I entered into academia at a pretty young age because I knew that I wanted to eventually pursue teaching in higher education. And it felt like a pretty natural fit. And so I went to University of Wyoming and I was there for 13 years teaching. And then I came here and now I'm the director of the dance program here.
And we are very fortunate to have you as at the helm of the Betsy Blackmon program in dance. You said something, Jen, a moment ago that I want to drill into a little bit. You said that as a child you were fascinated with this question of the right and wrong way to do things in dance. And our theme for today, or one of them, is what makes a body ideal? Is it its health, its beauty, its performance, its fertility, its conformity, its strength, or something else? And I wonder to what degree you yourself were thinking about the right way or the wrong way to be embodied as a dancer, even from early childhood.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of dancers have a tendency towards perfectionism, and it sort of attracts that type of mind and that type of spirit. And so I think that you were in the studio all day, every day, trying to meet this ideal of how to accomplish a task. And it was surrounding the physical form, but almost more so, it was surrounding the ability for the physical form to achieve a goal. And so you're really working on like exactly how the foot is shaped and exactly how the body is shaped in space, that then supports the classical perception of ideal.
And there's a complete flip side to that. I think that there are, dancers that are attracted to that. And then there's, Apollonian structure, and then there's a Dionysian structure, or lack of structure. And I would say in the Dionysian version was the sensation of the body moving in space. And my attraction was to the sensations, and it took a long time for me to understand that really specific design component was going to be a strongly necessary element to what I needed to achieve if I wanted to do this on a professional level. So when I first started training, it was all sensation. And then I think I trained long enough to understand, oh God, if I want to fly with the dragons, I need to really be a little bit more specific about how I'm approaching all of this. And then went to a ballet conservatory so I could do that.
Speaking as a non-dancer, it's really difficult to imagine the sensations of being embodied as you, your students, and your peers are. If there were one thing that you could attempt to communicate verbally to us, your co-hosts, and to your non-dancer audience about the sensation André spoke of or the experience of dancing, what might that be?
I want to say gravity. I think sometimes when we're thinking about gravity, we think, that's, the Earth is spinning and that's what's keeping us attached to the planet. And we think of it in really us in relation to the planet, which in some ways is a very narrow perspective of movement, right? Because if we think about gravity, it's actually the thing that, sure, it is connecting us to this planet in a way, and I'm not going to or cannot explain the actual physics of all of that. But then gravity is also in play with how our planet interacts with the other planets and how our solar system or plays with other solar systems. So really, when we're looking at gravity, it's the dance of the cosmos and how all the things relate to each other. And so when we start hooking into how our body interacts with gravity, we can think of it in this really small scale. Just if I lift my arm and I drop it, that's me dropping my arm and that's gravity. Or I can say this is, not say, but have more of a sense that this is how the universe moves. And I'm tapping into that universal concept. So my experience of movement is much bigger than myself. And I think that in the moments of not thinking, that's where it feels like movement expands too. So living in that cosmic spacefaring dragon world.
A buzzword in the Academy today is embodied cognition, and listening to André talk about that, I hear Jen's chuckling, listening to André talk about that, it struck me that non-dancers may never really understand what that means. I did have a more concrete question that riffs off of what André just said. When it comes to challenging gravity, to me there's already a tension, perhaps in the popular imagination, between a very slender, lithe body that encounters less gravity because it is slender and lithe, and a stronger body that, again, in the popular imagination, might be more earthbound and burdened because of its size. Would you guys reflect for a moment on the question of strength and musculature in your own experience, in your experience as educators and performers? And the reason why I asked, just to tip this off a little bit, is because I think it gets to the heart of one of the fundamental issues with dance as non-dancers see it. We expect dancers to look a certain way, and that look may not be conducive to the kind of performance that you are after and that you are educating.
I mean, it was interesting listening to André just now, because I think that there is the alternative perspective when it comes to dance of it being very ethereal, of it transcending the human form and human existence and transcending gravity. So I think that there is that contradiction. And within dance, especially currently, I think that we're constantly walking that line between the ethereal and the humanity. That's actually what we're playing with as performers and as dancers. And I think that as we're looking at what audiences really want, they don't actually have a perception of what an ideal body should be like on stage. I think they actually want to come and see humanity transcend. And so that is culturally embedded into how we perceive dancers as they should look a certain way in order to accomplish that goal. But truly, we're as audience looking for the opportunity to experience transcendence through the human form. And so I think that can come in any human existence, right? I'm not sure there's an ideal body that can accomplish that, but that's the line we're walking.
And to, think about, you can think about performance cars. If you put enough power in that engine, that thing is going to move. You can put, if you put a Toyota engine in a Ferrari, it's going to move like a Toyota. So the aesthetics, and I think the same thing for bodies, whatever we think of as an ideal body is not ideal unless it functions, unless it really can produce power and can change directions and can do so in a way that is, one might say, revel in its own virtuosic capacity versus, shaking and rattling at the brink of some pedestrian mundanity. So what we're looking at is a necessity to train a body to generate force via strength, power, right? And be stable enough to radically shift in any direction and make it seem, and part training will do some of that, right? But there's the ceiling to training is strength. So one has to increase those things.
A historical vignette from your historian host. If we close our eyes and imagine the Renaissance, many of us will see Vitruvian Man, Leonardo's famous drawing. Others might be familiar with Vesalius's work on the construction of the human body, published in 1543, with its famous and rather gory dissection scene in public on the frontispiece of the book. In both of those images, and in scores of other Renaissance paintings, sculptures, and drawings, bodies are muscular, and the musculature is accentuated. And that is the popular impression. As a scholar and student of Renaissance texts, however, bodies are actually described and analyzed in very different ways. To wit, almost exclusively in terms of what they do, not how they look. Would you care to reflect on that disjunction between the popular view of the body as a visual phenomenon and the applied understanding of the body as a functional mechanism in terms of your lives as dancers or teachers of dance?
I would have to say, I think the dance world is littered with its own standard, right, or ideals, right? And that certainly exists. And I think that any dancer entering into that is going to run into that idealism, and then have to, in some way, confront themselves. And there's a sense to me that a dancer needs to be an optimistic realist, so that you can, in some ways, see what you are and then make choices and decisions to bring yourself to a different place. If you aren't that thing, and I would say, I could look at and point to various aspects of my physicality and the way I'm constructed and say, I'm not a Ferrari. And maybe I'm a Ferrari, but my mind doesn't let me see that I'm a Ferrari, but it's hard to say, but regardless, there is, if you get down to the heart of what movement is, which is, again, an interaction with the cosmos, and then, as Jen said earlier, it's also our connection to this earth. And if our body is the thing that does all that, then our obligation is to figure out as precisely and intimately how our individual body functions at its best, and then bring it to that threshold, which continually moves forward as we move forward in our investigation of that. So the one we say, this is what I am, and then we make the best of that thing, I think that eventually it becomes undeniable, irrefutable. And when we embody ourselves, we transcend ideal, and we transcend how others even see us. So the ideal in itself is simply distracting from the true work.
I don't know how I follow up with that. I was just like reflecting a little bit as André was talking about how our culture and society has moved away so much from our physical form, and it continues to shift towards a sedentary lifestyle where we are not utilizing our bodies in their full capacity and their fullest glory. And so I think as a dancer, that's something that is really important, and part of our mission and our work is bringing dance back into our everyday lives in some ways, and also challenging our culture to look past our sit down and watch. And hopefully through watching performance, you're inspired to move past that. But that also then highlights the necessity for continuing to observe and see dance and participate in dance, because it is our connection to our humanity. It's our connection to the deepest part of our soul and the deepest part of our way to communicate that we have forgotten, because we rely so heavily on spoken word as we're doing right now.
We should get up and dance.
It's a podcast. We need dance casts, I guess.
Dance casts.
Pod dances? I don't know.
There's so many threads to pull on from what you two just said. I want to pull on one from what André was speaking about. André, you mentioned that there are many individual expressions of movement and, of course, of dance, and yet there is one idealized body type and perhaps even one idealized movement pattern or set of patterns in the dance world. It's been a theme on Possessed this spring, as if I may, to think really carefully about the disconnect between everyone's intuitive sense that individuality matters and the enormous pressure that cultural norms place on us and the ideas that still possess us. As educators, what would you say to our audience of almost exclusively non-dancers about living in our own bodies, using them more appropriately, and even trying to get at that humanity versus ethereum tension that you spoke of earlier? In other words, what advice might you offer to our listeners about how to be more expressive in the body?
I think that something we've become very good at in our culture is judging ourselves to the point of incapacity. And so when that happens, when we get to that point where we are seeking perfection in our lives, in our bodies, in our daily routines, in our roles as parents and teachers and humans and friends and children, as we start to place these expectations of ideal onto ourselves, not just ideal body, but ideal lifestyle, ideal ways to communicate, it's interesting to see the vulnerability, and vulnerability starts to drift away from us and drip out of us to a point where we have these walls constructed and the facades built. And so I think that in our daily lives, understanding that the most vulnerable way to be in this life is to be in your body, and acknowledge that this body is our only way to experience. And so I think that finding ways to remove the expectation of ideal from your own self is what allows you to connect with other people in a way that you might not if you have a perception of what ideal is and a perception of what that ideal body looks like. So that's the goal, right? Is to actually connect to the people that sit around you and the earth that surrounds us. And the more we hold on to those facades and ideals, the less we're able to do that.
I'm a philosopher, so I listen to conversations like this, and I'm trying to like build theories in the background because that's how I understand the world, is through like philosophical theories. So one of the big questions we're asking is like, what makes something ideal? And I've heard a lot of different answers kind of bandied about. So the first one that you guys are not talking about much, but it's the first one that came to my mind, is like aesthetic ideals, right? It looks a certain way. I know this is really important to how I think about my own evaluation of my body, and I don't think I'm alone in subjecting it to kind of aesthetic. So there's an aesthetic ideal. But then there's other ideals, right? We also have a functional ideal. So you can think about, like, people talk about, oh, well, he's got a basketball player build. He's got a linebacker build, right? And that's not about aesthetics. It's not like, I like my basketball players to be very tall because they look better on the court. It's because that's a build that allows you to more effectively play the sport. So then I'm like, okay, let's look at the dancer build. Is there an ideal dancer build? Well, you might think it's like basketball, right? Like, well, you're doing dance stuff, so some bodies are just going to be naturally better. And it's about function. It's not necessarily about an ideal. In all of these cases, it seems like what makes something good or not depends on like the ends that you have. If your end is to be beautiful, then that's going to tell you the measures, right? But if your end is to play basketball, that's going to give you another measure. So now when I go to the case of dance, what I'm hearing from you is dance is about being in your body. So there's not like one right way to do it. And consequently, there's not going to be an ideal body for that, because we're all in our bodies. We're all expressing and being in our bodies in different ways. So there's kind of like no standard for evaluating a right or wrong way of doing that. Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, as you're talking, I think there's so many layers to that, right? Because dance is not necessarily about the end goal, although it can be. And I think André is about to touch on like how the importance of strength and balance of flexibility and mobility with strength is so important. But I always talk about with my students that ultimately the audience doesn't care if you're doing 2 turns or 6 turns at that moment. What they care about is, are they seeing you as a human on stage working through this and accomplishing that goal? So there's more to it than the task, which I think is what you're hitting on, right? Is that, yes, there might be some type of idealized body that can accomplish the goals of dance more specifically, and we can build on that idealized expectation. But the audience doesn't. When you're watching dance, you're drawn to the dancer that is like being possessed by the gods. You're drawn to that dancer. You're not drawn to the dancer necessarily that is doing the task. And so there's a spiritual component to dance that is not necessarily addressed through the lens of sport.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, yes, just to piggyback on that, I think the road in, because we do feel, I mean, we both live in that place of, you know, when you are actively engaged in it, the body does disappear. And whatever it is that movement is meant to do, that aspect of existence flows through you. It's not a body anymore. It's a vessel. So this fragile thing of bone and flesh then suddenly almost discorporates, or has to be perhaps more like a if you don't fire pottery right, it explodes under pressure, or it doesn't contain the thing that you put in it. But if it's prepared, which is what all our training is moved to do, it then can channel or harness whatever it is that does. But I wanted to add another layer to that, was the sensation is the root in. And this is what is it? An experience I had as a dancer, but then I think it translates to, everybody. And it's kind of remember that movie When Harry Met Sally?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
she,
Yes.
that one woman, she eats something. Who is that?
Meg
Meg
Ryan.
Meg Ryan.
Does
Okay.
a fake orgasm.
She does a fake orgasm. And then the other woman at the table is like, I want to have what she's having.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that is essentially what Jen was describing. Like when we're watching a dancer, like you can say, technically we're all taught to chew up down with the teeth, but just because you chew very well and you have an exquisitely shaped mouth for whatever that means, right? It doesn't mean that I want to eat what you're eating. But when the rest of you responds, your body responds, your spirit responds to whatever it is that you put in your mouth, and when you watch somebody eat the perfect dessert, it was good because something in them just changes, right? And you're like, wow, I want some of that. So if we can, in a sense, watch something move and watch yourself respond. And if you respond to a movement, then what you're looking for in your own movement is to replicate that experience within yourself. So suddenly, the thing that you watched and were moved by their movement, then all you're doing in your life is then you're seeking that sensation. And you can break that down into, say, maybe technical steps at some point, but then eventually that technique transforms into a just sheer sensory experience. But you know what you're looking for. And so because you know what you're looking for, and you eventually come to know where you are, then you're connecting two dots, as opposed to having some vague amorphous idea of an ideal and you don't even know where you are. We're not reliable in terms of ourselves. So, have a sensation, experience your own sensations, and then move, and you'll find it.
Can I just challenge you both just a little bit? Like, I just want to see how you respond to this. So you're both emphasizing this kind of Dionysian ideal where, you're channeling the gods, you're becoming a vessel for something greater, and it's that kind of experience that's what it's all about. But what about the Apollonian? So, like, let's say I'm directing a ballet. Let's say I'm putting on Swan Lake. Mm-hmm. Isn't part of what's going on there is that I have an artistic vision for how this thing is supposed to look. There's a certain way. I'm got to be casting actor. I got to be casting dancers into certain parts. And aren't there going to be certain body types that I think are better suited to this part or that part? And don't I need a certain composition of body parts to develop the artistic vision I'm trying to present to the audience? I mean, it's not just, dance isn't just created so that dancers get the experience of channeling the gods. I'm also creating an artistic presentation. And the dancers are my medium for isn't that part of the picture?
Yes. Yeah, of course it's a part of the picture. And I think that, one thing we aren't touching on a lot is that we're approaching this from a educational perspective with dancers that have already embodied the technique. And so I think that's one layer that we do need to touch on, is that you have to build the technique. You have to understand the detail. And that goes back to my original, why I love ballet, is because it does fall into that Apollonian perspective of right and wrong and, doing it to this place of perfection. And so, yes, there is a perception of what that should look like. But I also think that historically it has had this ideal placed upon it that all of those swans should look exactly the same. And I don't think that applies, because you can still achieve this order and structure and detail regardless of what those swans specifically look like. And so I believe that we're moving to a place where we understand that a diversity of swans is much more interesting to watch. All of them are achieving the explicit and specific goals that the choreographer or director is asking. And they're all putting their arms in exactly the same place, and they're all holding their hand in a specific place. They're all looking in the right, but the body type, the ideal body type that can be a swan, should be challenged, and it has been.
And to piggyback on that, like, yes, I mean, if you just want your swans, like if you want cardboard cutouts of swans, then that's sort of, in a sense, if we're really focusing on some visual ideal, right? Then what we have to accept with that visual ideal is an acceptance of cardboard, right? So if you're really looking for an experience that is going to not just move the dancers so that they have this experience of the dancer felt great, but that an audience can have their own visceral response. Because we do know that, we've seen people that are very attractive, and then we talk to them for a little while, right? And this isn't like attractive people are boring, and that's enough, right? We had enough, right? And so when we put the ideal too far forward, and we say that person looks like this part, then we're not necessarily choosing the thing that allows the audience. Now, ultimately, because there's a few aspects I have to come at this at. One, when couches are great, and I love my TV and streaming services, right? So, if I'm going to so I know when I sit at home, I'm going to be comfortable and I'm going to watch the thing that I want to watch. But at a theater, I don't know I haven't been in a theater yet where the seats are as comfortable as my home, and that I'm guaranteed that, if I don't like what I'm watching, I'm going to go to something else.
It's like flying economy.
Right. But now what if economy made you watch something that was so unappealing that you were bored to tears, and now you're bored to tears and uncomfortable, and because I'm involved in the art form, I'm also, my sensibilities have been insulted. Right? That you've profaned my sacred, right? So this is the worst case scenario. Wait, now where are we headed with all this? Cardboard swans. So, right, but everyone feels this way to a certain extent, right? So if you're talking to someone who's visually appealing, obviously you probably went there first because they were visually appealing, but you talk for a while and you're like, wow, I don't think this person's really a listener. I don't quite feel heard, so I'm going to wrap up the conversation. I'm going to move on, right? And audiences come to the theater because audiences want to feel heard. They want to commune with something greater than themselves. That's the dancer's real job, isn't to display something that's not, it may feel like, oh, I could never be a dancer, but that's not the point. The point is, were you in communication with that dancer on some, subatomic level, right? That's the actual job, right? Is to allow someone to have an experience that they sat in a room full of strangers and felt that somehow they saw themselves a little bit more clearly at the end of the day. So there's that. That's the actual job. That's what you want your swans to do, right? If you want the audience there for more than 5 minutes, sure. If you get whatever I'm putting in quotes on this podcast, little air quotes here, like these are my ideal looking swans. But then after 5 minutes, everyone wants to shoot the swans, right? Then that's not great. But then also, I'm gonna propose this: if now a dancer will train anywhere from 4 to 8 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week. Now, one can spend that much time, but not train particularly vigorously, and therefore, they will only be able to progress to a certain level. right? But if we're looking at someone moving into the dance arena on a professional level, then they actually took that 4 to 8 hours, whatever that they brought, and they trained it quite vigorously, regardless of how one is composed. If one can withstand that level of rigor, that body is going to work, and that body is going to have an aesthetic impact that is a direct result of that time and diligence. So there's no getting around it. An athlete looks like an athlete, not because they are made to look like an athlete, or no, not because they were born that way, but because they made themselves that way. So the form follows function.
May I ask a question that is an attempt to sort of wrap up a couple of different themes on the table here, from the philosophical to the aesthetic to the functional? College dancers display more corporeal diversity than elite dance companies. For example, having recently been treated to an evening with the Joffrey Ballet from Chicago, brought here by our guests today, amongst others, with support from the College of Arts and Sciences and the University of South Carolina, I observed that many of those dancers have an extremely homogeneous look. Please assess the following statement. As one advances in the profession as a dancer, and as the company is more elite and prestigious, is it essential that that idealized body is how dancers appear, or is that incidental?
I think that it is the result of the training. I think it's also the result of, there are certain bodies that, we haven't talked a whole lot about this balance between mobility and strength that is so important specifically in classical ballet, that is to some extent necessary in order to accomplish the most elite levels of the classical ballet world. But I also think that if you really look at those dancers, to a maybe untrained eye, they all look the same. But actually, they're very different bodies. And they have different strengths and different abilities. And while they might look somewhat homogenous, the actual truth of it is that they're quite different. And so I think that's what we want to take away from that is that they have a certain level of mobility versus stability, mobility versus strength that allowed them to accomplish the amount of success that they've seen. But there's a variety of different types of bodies that can do that.
And when you talk to them, or any professional dancer, because it looks, part of the sport of dance is to make it look effortless, right? And so it always seems like, wow, that just happened, and because it appears effortless, one doesn't see, well,
The sweat.
yeah, yeah, right. You don't see it, and so it, in some ways, it appears to be all grace and virtue, but when you talk to those dancers, you talk to any professional dancer, and we arrived by, oh my God, it was so much hard work and it was so much rejection, and every one of those dancers has numerous rejection stories, and where they just didn't match up, and so, or they and it could be for a multitude of reasons, of some idealized thing, or some technical reason, or some strength reason, whatever. So it's at play for everyone, and I think the difference between collegiate dancers and professional dancers is mostly a question of tenacity. Because a lot of dancers, the drop-off doesn't come because of how they look. The drop-off comes because they said, if I don't have a job after college, I'm done. But the ones, there's a very small percentage of dancers who are like, oh, I don't have a job out of college. I'm moving to New York City. I'm going to work this out, right? And, that was certainly my path. I moved to New York, but I remember when I was producing a show in New York, choreographing it, this wonderful dancer, she was 35, and we had cast her as the lead in our show, which was supposed to be a male lead, but she was so incredible, we cast her instead. And she wanted to have coffee one day, and she says, hey, I just wanted to thank you for taking a chance on me. I'm 35 years old. I've been kicking it in New York for 10 years, and I've gotten some work, but no one has given me something like this before. And I was like, wow, well, you're absolutely magic. And yeah, of course we wanted you to do this. And anyway, she did that show, and then a few months later, she fell. She became the lead dancer in Then She Fell, which was a huge New York phenomenon that Baryshnikov went and praised, and Hugh Jackman went and praised, and all the who's who of anywhere went and praised that show, and they were praising Mary, who I guess at that point was 36 and had finally gotten her big break. And then she eventually retired as a rehearsal director. So, it's if you want it, you will become it, but you have to truly desire it.
Yeah, and just sort of to build on, I've got two thoughts built on that, is that the tenacity, I mean, if you look at André and I, we do not have what you might consider the ideal bodies. Like, I'm 5'10", and, quote, told many times that I was too tall to be a ballet dancer. And here I am, pursuing this career. And André was told his feet didn't point well enough, or, there's so many things that will be in your way. And so I think that success is not necessarily based off of the ideal body type. It's based off of the tenacity of that person. And then just circling back to your question about like this professional company and they all look the same, that's actually the training. The training is that the arm goes right there. And if everyone's arm goes right there at that moment, then they all look the same. And so that goes back to our swans, right? Is that the training is what allows you to have that perception that they're all similar. And that's what the beauty is, and that's what we go to see, is the underlying training of that attention to this specific detail.
I love this notion of training and tenacity, Jen, and I also really appreciate your point about perspective. From a certain distance, the untrained eye sees professional dancers as homogenous. From closer and from a more trained perspective, there's incredible diversity there.
Yeah.
So we haven't talked much about the kind of historical perspective over body ideals, but I find it really liberating to look at the history of these kinds of issues, because I think all of us have like ideal bodies in our mind based on what they can do or how they look or whatever. And it's natural to think of our ideals as timeless and eternal, as though this just objectively true. This is just the perfect body, and everybody always thought so forever. And history is great because it shows us that that's not the case. That actually it's highly contingent, right? So like even when I look back at like ancient Greek statues of like idealized male physiques, and I'm like, yeah, well, obviously this is amazing because even the Greeks thought so. But the Greek statues had small junk because they thought that that was like your animal nature, right?
Oh,
and you didn't want it to, if it was too big, that was too animalistic. So they wanted to keep it small, and that's definitely not our culture. So what's interesting, though, is that what you find beautiful or ideal is historically contingent. You are a product of your times.
Of course.
And so one of the things which I find very liberating, right? If I get in moments where I feel bad about my body or whatever, I can be like, wait, this is all kind of made up, right? It's just a reflection of our cultural values. But one of the things I get out of what you're saying is one of the big values that we have today, like the Greeks' value was that they didn't want us to be animalistic or whatever. Have you ever heard of these fat men clubs?
No.
Oh yeah, there was this thing like it was. So this was like around. I think this was. Oh, I should have researched before. I think this is around the time of the Depression. So like food was short and people
Right.
were thin, and so there was this fat man club where men would join it, and then the goal was they would eat and they would get really fat and they would like but it was considered like it was
Wealth?
yeah, it was wealth, it was status.
wow.
Because they could afford the food, but it was also considered beautiful. Like they thought that this was like a really hot thing, right? But when I listen to what you guys are saying, I think one of our big values now is diversity.
Yeah.
And in virtue of prizing and valuing diversity, that affects what we find beautiful and what we like to see. And so when you emphasize that we don't want just one kind of ideal ballet look or one ideal dancer body type, you're expressing this value that we as a culture value diversity. And we want to see that on the stage, and we find that beautiful. And I like that. That's very liberal. I like
Well,
that thought.
actually, can I jump
Yeah.
on that? And because I love that, and I think when you just said that, it sparked something about diversity and what makes diversity. Because I'm not sure if it's diversity as a word like I just love all things that are different. I think it's I love all things that are honest. So you get diversity by honesty. So each person expressing what it is that they are, right? And so, my body moves differently than your body, than your body, than your body, than your body. So if I inhabit my body, then I represent myself honestly. If I pretend that my body is something else, which is what we all do to different degrees in different ways, whether it's, the clothes we wear or the thing that the image we want to present, it's some form of desire that isn't based in the truth. So it does lead to a homogeny, and then we say homogeny is bad, and then we say, well, diversity is good. But if we look past that, then we just say, what I really prize in a conversation is when someone speaks their truth and I'm allowed to speak my truth, and then our combined truths make a new truth. So maybe that's ultimately what we're looking for is honest representation, and not for the sake of itself, but for the sake of all of us communicating.
Story, brief. I was at a dance class the other day where I was one of very few men, and without a doubt, the least coordinated person there. Some of the dancers were probably good enough to have qualified for your program, all the way down to me. And the first song or two had such complicated choreography for this bumbler that I despaired a little bit. And the instructor, in the middle of song 2, literally paused the music, and she said the following: "The only important thing is that you have fun and express yourself." And as soon as she said that, the entire mood in the room changed. Mine changed. I saw other people loosen up. And from that moment on, it was a completely different experience for me. So to the point of individual expression, all that teacher needed to say was, have fun and express yourself, and everybody did.
Right.
That's pretty great. And I think that when we get for dancers on a professional track, at some point you're training and you forget that prime aspect, the prime directive in a Star Trek sense, right? Have fun and express yourself, because we get to thinking that the technique, we live to serve the technique, versus the language. Any language, technique is a language. The language exists to express the individual, and you can't do that if you're not having fun.
To paraphrase something Jen said a few minutes ago, I'm not directly quoting you, it's a paraphrase, the less we hold on to an ideal, the better we are.
Yeah.
It's good advice for our times.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jennifer Deckert. Thank you, André Megerdichian. Appreciate having you on the show.
Thanks for having us.
What a pleasure. You guys are great.
Possessed is made possible by a generous grant from the University of South Carolina Humanities Collaborative.